Good morning. Today I'm going to be soldering up this little circuit board that I etched last night. The aim of this is to basically fix fibre optic Christmas tree that we have and which the light bulb died in. It was originally just this little light bulb which shone through this spinning colour wheel to create weird funky effects through the fibre optics. But the bulb is dead. I don't have a spare MR11 bulb to fit it with, and besides that thing runs on like 12 watts, which is a bit overkill for what is frankly a few flashy colours. So instead I've etched this board, and that will let me solder on a load of these tiny little where are we? That's never going to focus. But these little SMD LEDs with built-in colour changing flashy lights, basically. They're more typically, you more typically see them as standard LEDs like this. You just plug it in and it automatically cycles through various colours on its own with just two leads, so no way of controlling it or anything. But I've got some surface mount versions of them. I originally tried building this as a strip board version like this with all the LEDs on that side. The normal diodes there, the 1N4007 diodes, are because the motor in the original unit is actually AC. So the transformer that comes with it transforms 240 volts AC into 12 volts AC. So to power my LEDs properly, I need to actually stick a bridge rectifier in there to give me DC out of it. I'll probably stick a capacitor on here at some point, depending on how they behave, if they get all flickery or something. But at this point, I could only ever get like half of them to light, and somewhere there's a dead short circuit in it. You connect the power supply across which way around is this? Yeah, so you connect a power supply across between about there and down there at the negative end, and it's just a dead short. So somewhere I've completely screwed up. I spent several hours yesterday trying to figure out where I'd screwed up and could not for the life of me figure it out. So I ended up giving up again in KiCad, printing out a transparency and etching this thing, which didn't come out quite right. You can see at the top there it's sort of a bit speckled. My developer chemical, I think, was a bit overused, so it's been used for far too many boards. So I ended up having this sat in the developer chemical for over an hour to get it to mostly develop. But at the same time it sort of didn't quite go properly, so there were still some areas that we still refused to develop and some areas that ended up over-developing. I also completely forgot to print out the transparency mirrored, so the lines, the edges are slightly blurred as well. You can see that the traces aren't actually smooth and straight or anything. So in this particular case, because I used giant tracers and it's not doing anything particularly clever, that's not going to be an issue. And even at the top where it's all speckly, that should be fine. It's not high current, despite the thick tracers, it's not high current. I used thick tracers to give me as much leeway as possible when etching it. So I just drilled a couple of holes in it to mount it on the base, which is over here. So literally just mount it on there, and then that will shine up through the base of the tree, and we should have nice flashy lights in the tree again. But this time running at, I don't know, I think I'm using 16 LEDs on this, so they're probably running at less than 20 milliamps each or something, I don't know. But it's going to be absolutely tiny power usage compared to what it was before, and with its I think it was like a 12 watt bulb or something, 10 watt bulb, and another watt for the motor, which is, yeah, that's kind of crazy. But as my partner points out, the tree itself only ever cost £14 about 10 years ago. So spending a lot of money trying to fix this is sort of counterproductive, but at the same time, obviously, I enjoy doing this sort of thing. So I'm not particularly bothered that I'm about to have spent an entire weekend on this project. Given it's all surface mount LEDs, I'm planning to use this syringe of cheap Chinese solder paste and just solder paste it all, and then reflow it with another cheap Chinese hot air gun thing. It'll just probably be a bit easier and a bit quicker and more reliable than trying to hand solder tiny little surface mount LEDs everywhere. Actually, the diode pads on this are huge. I used the KiCad hand soldering diode pads, so they're just absolutely massive. You can see trying to stick a diode on the pads, and it's basically space for another entire diode there, so it's a bit unnecessary. I'm also using Schottky diodes so that I lose as little voltage as possible, rather, because I only get 12 volts from the supply, and then if I've got you can see from this it's 4 LEDs on each row, and then that's 4 in parallel, or 4 in series, 4 in parallel. So that'll give me a total of needing 12 volts basically to power each of the 3 watts. 3 volts. Oh my god, words today. Yeah, so if I've only got 12 volts to play with coming from the supply, I don't want to be losing it's going to be basically over a volt at least with normal diodes. So screw that. I'd quite rather prefer to actually have as much of my 12 volts to use to actually light LEDs. I may find that the end result is even brighter than it was to start with, which will be fun. But it's just a little decorative tree. It's not designed to actually light anything up or anything. So let's get started with this. As always with the solder paste, it's probably going to be a nightmare to get started, unfortunately, but that's just the way it is. Once it's started coming out, it tends to be okay, but actually getting it started is quite difficult. Not helped by it sort of drying up a bit, but that's only half the issue. Right, this probably won't be very interesting, I'm afraid, but, you know. You'll notice that there's absolutely nothing in the way of solder paste or silk screen or anything like that you would normally expect on a properly done PCB. But my attempts so far at putting solder mask on my own PCBs have not gone well. I don't think I've ever had one go completely successfully. I've had some come close, but most of them I end up with the solder paste, no, not the solder paste, the solder resist, solder mask stuff. I end up with solder mask sticking to the transparency that I'm using to develop it on, cure it with, and mask it out and everything. So it's like, yay, it's cured, but it's sort of cured by sticking itself to the transparency. You peel the transparency off and you find that it's just peeling the solder mask with it, which is a bit unhelpful, frankly. And yeah, shaky hands win again, unfortunately. Combination of having to apply a lot of pressure to this syringe and having to do it accurately. It's not something that my hands are any good at, but it'll be fine. I'm painfully aware that I'm also nudging the camera stand here a bit, which isn't brilliant. Doing what I can to avoid it, but trying to do this while there's a camera and tripod thingy in the way is a bit on the tricky side. Did I get everything? I think that's everything. Awesome. Right. Now for the fun bit of trying to actually place all of my diodes in the correct orientation. As I mentioned before, I don't have any silk screen or anything else actually on this board to indicate what direction anything needs to be going in. It is fairly obvious though. The giant pads here and here are where the AC input will be coming from. And then literally this is the top rail, positive rail, that's the negative rail or ground rail. So this diode here is pointing that way, that one's also pointing that way up to the 12 volt rail, these two are pointing down to the ground rail, and then all of the coloured LEDs are pointing downwards to just get from the top down to the bottom. So it's not complicated or anything, it's just a case of now trying to get them all in that right direction while not really being able to see what I'm doing, because the lighting is not all that great behind my camera. Oops, bit of a random cut there as my video file reached the 4 gig limit on my file system, which isn't particularly great. Also not got a huge amount of space left apparently, but we'll be fine if I can stop nudging the camera. Why is that going that way? Oh, that's going to be the worst. Stay. Right, might need to touch a few of these up when I'm done, but at least the solder paste should hold things in position long enough for me to, or just hold it in position basically initially, and then I can go back and touch things up if necessary. What's going on with this? Are we going to work? Right, that should be enough of those. Yeah, that's what these little diodes look like. Obviously being red, green and blue dyes, plus a little controller chip, all in a tiny 0805, slightly bigger, it's more like 0807 to be honest. It's quite a bit wider than the standard 0805 SMD LEDs. So I actually created my own footprint in KiCad for these because they are so much wider. Yeah, this is going to be a pain. Doesn't entirely help that these things have a habit of actually sticking to my tweezers. As I said before, as long as at least one end of these diodes is stuck down in solder paste, I'm happy. I just didn't want to have to solder them completely from scratch and not have them even stuck down. Solder paste has the advantage that both ends or both pads actually melt at the same time. So you don't end up with one end quite a bit higher because it's like been sat on a lump of solid solder or something like that. Which you don't necessarily have to get if you're doing it by hand, but you often do if you end up trying to rework it a bit. Get over there. I feel like there should be a better technique for flipping these the right way up. Just double checking on the last one to make sure that I have been getting them in the right orientation. Just my luck if I ended up having just put them all in backwards. Right, I'll have a closer look at these, make sure they look fairly reasonable. it's going to be all completely hidden away, so I'm not particularly bothered if it ends up looking not particularly aesthetically brilliant. Right. The hot air gun set to 300-ish. Airspeed can drop a bit. Then untangle its cable from everything. Yay! Ah, come on. Trying to see if there's something I can use to prop this up a bit. Get the camera down a bit closer. Tell you what, I'll pause this, figure something out, and then come back. And we're back. This time with another 19 gigabytes of phone storage to play with. So that's... And yes, I've raised up the PCB so we should actually be able to see what's going on a bit better. And hopefully the hot air from this hot air gun won't upset my phone. I'm going to have to turn a fan on because of the fumes from the solder paste, as well as the fan from the hot air gun, so hopefully this won't get too noisy. Actually, let's turn this up a bit hotter. A bit easier when it's hotter. Nothing on here is particularly delicate this time. I love how cool that is, where it just changes from this grey, boring paste into bright, shiny metal. Well, that worked well, didn't it? Right, that air gun's just going to sit there and cool down for a while now. Not sure I want to be touching this just yet, but it does look like it's all worked quite nicely. Actually, that's okay. Bit toasty, but it'll do. Now, one of the resistors, one of the diodes hasn't worked quite well, properly. So, if I just skip the diodes for now. Now this power supply is only set to 5 volts at the moment, so in theory nothing should happen really. No, although if I do there, yes, look at that. And then you wait, and they fade to green, and it's all pretty. Don't want to give those 5 volts for too long, that's a bit high for one strip. This should do 2 strips at 6.8 volts. sort of working. Why are we only sort of working? Oh my god. Right, that's better. I think it's because the copper on the top strip is so speckly. 3 rows work. We're already more successful than I was with the last one. And then 11.6 volts, so this will be about what they get through the diodes. Drawing 0.01 amps, so yeah. It's now dropped to 0.00 amps. Power supply isn't very accurate, and I've only got 2 digits after the decimal place, but yeah, basically this is drawing not much power at all. And yeah, unfortunately they do go slightly out of sync. I'm hoping that won't be too big a deal. I mean, when it goes through all the fibre optics, it's not going to be that big a deal anyway. And you can see that some of the LEDs are getting brighter and changing colour slightly ahead of the others, and over time that'll just get worse, unfortunately. Can I not write this down a bit here? Maybe that'll help make this a bit more visible. Yeah. Oh. And back to red. So now we just have to fix this one diode, make sure everything else works, and we should be good. I have too many cables and things on my desk, this is a mess. Over there. Soldering iron set to 450 degrees, that seems appropriate, not. No, apparently that didn't work.